Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Welcome back. It's Talking Books and Writing and Stuff. We're with Radio Rick Lewis from Clarkston, Washington, just across the border from Lewiston, Idaho. Get it? It's Lewis and Clark, Clark and Lewis. Aha! From the Lewis and Clark 1804 expedition, I think it was, 1805, I don't know. Radio Rick Lewis, how you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Super. So, Radio Rick, when did you get the name Radio Rick?
Well, actually, the name came from the fact that I was going to join, and actually had joined, a radio station in Oregon. And I had been using the name Pete Kelly in my hometown of Bakersfield, California, and was planning to use it in Oregon, except that radio station already had a couple of Kellys.
Huh, right.
My last name is Lewis. And although I don't use it on the air any longer, I thought about switching and using my real name, Rick Lewis. But then again, there was a guy on the competing station named Mike Lewis, and he had been in town on the radio. I think was a native of the town. He'd been on the radio in town since he'd been in high school, and that was like 20 years prior. So Rick Lewis wasn't going to do. Thus it became Radio Rick.
And the reason we're talking with Radio Rick here on Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, because we talk about books and writing and music and stuff, is because I first came across you when you were on Top Shelf Oldies with the Hometown Countdown. But
yes.
That's why we're talking to Radio Rick, but let's back up a bit. So where did you get your radio start then? Was that in Bakersfield?
Yeah, I started in Bakersfield, did college radio for a while, was bombing out in college due to a long set of circumstances and some bad academic choices. And I just kind of lucked into a job in radio, and which is what I wanted anyway. That's really where I was wanting to go. So I said, okay, I'll take it. I could either get a dishonorable dismissal from college and go into radio, or have even worse circumstances and have to pull myself up from them. And I wasn't a bad student, but you would think so by my record. So I took the radio job at amazingly low wages, and that's where it started.
Amazingly low, and they always have been, and they always will be, unless you're a superstar. So
absolutely.
That's right. Same with me. So Bakersfield, that's the home of Buck Owens, is it?
Buck Owens. Merle Haggard was from Wasco, which is a few miles down the road. His song "Radiator Man" from Wasco, and, so it all starts there. But there's not just country in Bakersfield. There is the alternative band Korn. And for that matter, lots of musicians and people have come out of Bakersfield over the years,
and including yourself. So now,
yeah, but I don't think I've made many headlines. Oh. But I still came from there.
Oh, good. So you grew up there, I'm assuming, then.
I did, yes. I spent 35 years there.
And then after Bakersfield, you went to Oregon, you say?
I went to Oregon, a small town called The Dalles, which is east of Portland. And I did radio there for 6 years, and that was my last commercial radio job, on the air anyway, as a DJ, and that ended in 1993, which seems like a long time ago because it was.
I knew a guy who worked in The Dalles, but that was, long before your time, I think. I think his on-air name was Gary Mann. It was Gary Nauman, so he called himself Gary Mann.
I've heard of him, but don't know of him directly.
Oh, yeah. So we worked at Cary Radio in Blaine, Washington, which was or still is, but we had a great owner. It was a Christian-type station where you play the tapes, with all those guys that come in and want to their message was always, "We're all doomed. Praise the Lord. Send us money." So,
and they were co-owned, I believe, at one point by the folks who owned a station in Wasco near Bakersfield called KERI.
That's right, because our owner had a almonds, yes. He'd go down and bring back a big bag of almonds from his almond farm. He had a station in Bakersfield, a station in Seattle, and the one in Blaine. And he's a nice guy, great guy. It was a wonderful place. We had full medical coverage, got raises, believe it or not, raises. It was the best paying job I ever had. And all we did was human automation. We just put the tapes on and take them off, and put the tapes on and take them off, and every once in a while give a time check, and that was about it. So it was a super
But that
job.
religious programming was lucrative for the owners of stations who ran it, and thus you could get those raises, whatever that means. I think it means an increase in pay. I don't know. I don't have any direct experience with that.
What with having a raise?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is Radio Rick from Clarkston, Washington. Lewiston, Idaho,
Yeah.
Clarkston, Washington.
Yeah.
So
There's nothing for Sacagawea. She doesn't get any credit in this area.
Oh, she from there too? No, I don't think so. So anyway, here we are. And you said the last time you were on the radio was in the Dalles, Oregon. What happened after that then?
Well, unemployment. But, seriously, I did become unemployed. I was, the Dalles had 3 radio stations. One I had already worked at, because I worked at 2 stations there. But the second of those 2 went satellite.
Yep.
Amazing, by the way, how small those satellite receiver boxes are. And it came in the mail, and the box that made me unemployed, among other things, that box was right there on the main desk at the radio station, and thoughts of vandalism certainly entered my mind, but but I'm not a criminal, and besides that, they'd probably figure out who did it. So
Right.
So the satellite killed the radio star, so
Right.
to speak.
Yeah.
And I moved to Phoenix. There was a gentleman there who said, if you lived in Phoenix, I'd hire you. So I moved to Phoenix, and he didn't. And thus I was unemployed for a year, and that really, the first 2 years in Phoenix were really some of the worst in my life as far as circumstances go. And, I moved there with nothing and continued to have nothing for a couple of years. And then I picked up a job at Metro Networks doing traffic reporting.
Right.
And I did that for 5 years.
Uh-huh.
And I was doing traffic on the sports station.
Oh, and it was always the same, right? There's a tie-up on I-90, and Highway 10 is backed up, and there's a rollover on East Wawa Street out near Peoria, and that was the same ones all the time, right?
Well, basically, and there really are in any city predictable trouble spots.
Right.
And I mean, there are intersections where there is almost always an accident.
Yes.
And but on the other hand, the traffic people, whether they be Metro Traffic or Total Traffic or any of the other folks involved in it, hit upon the idea that if they supplied traffic to radio stations, well, they would also supply commercials. And those commercials would make money, and everybody wins, and everyone did for quite a while. I was doing it just before, they put all the traffic cameras out, which, changed the traffic business quite a bit. As a blind guy, I couldn't really make very good use of the traffic cameras. So scanners were fortunately very good to me, and I had several of them. I ended up being home-based because there was a merger of the two existing traffic companies in Phoenix, and Metro actually was only in the Phoenix market for a couple of years until it merged with Skyview, which is still out there and still a big provider, all throughout the radio business of various things. And so I ended up working for Skyview as part of my, 5 years there in that business. And I was laid off from the traffic department. And it's weird what goes through your mind because I was laid off. I had really no prospects. I did have a prospect that would appear later that I actually turned down because I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work out, whether it was going to be short-term or not. But I had no prospects. They had a news division, and about 2 days after I was laid off, which was, by the way, the day after the office Christmas party, where I noticed a couple of executives behaving in a very distant way toward me.
Yes.
They knew they were going to be calling me up the next day and telling me goodbye. And so about 2 days later, almost like I knew something, it came to me with great clarity that you shouldn't be worrying about this, Rick. Something is going to happen.
Yep.
And it's going to be positive. And I thought it was a spell of lunacy on my part. But really, I don't know. Maybe we know something inwardly sometimes that we just don't have any key to. So, as it turned out, Metro had a news division called Metro Source at that time, and an executive with that department called me up and offered me a gig, basically writing and rewriting news. We had 18 bureaus throughout the country.
Wow.
And so I edited and rewrote and simplified and all that from during the all-night shift. I did that, taking news from the various bureaus and just basically trying to write them in a more logical form for radio.
Yes. And
we had a contract with Reuters.
Ah, yes.
And if you've ever read Reuters news stories written for newspapers, they don't follow a specific order. They don't believe in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They believe in 1, 5, 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 5. So my job was to basically write those out in a way that they could be read on the radio and would make sense
right
to the audience, with a quick listen.
So I understand. Yes, I know what you're saying, because I think a lot of, even now, media people write for the eye, not the ear. And so they write something that looks great on paper, but it's a newspaper story. It's not a radio story.
And that's exactly what it is. Those stories were written for newspapers, for wire services that went to newspapers, and of course, we were dealing in radio stations.
Yep.
And the only tangible, we distributed stuff all over the country, and I'm sure it was used, but not having lived all over the country all at the same time, the only real evidence I had of my work was to either see my work on the wire service that we had,
yep,
or one time I heard one of my stories and recognized the wording from what I wrote a few hours earlier on Air America. So so that was my time in the spotlight, is listening to myself on an Air America newscast.
And so then, from there, how did we get to the hometown countdown on Top Shelf Oldies? Was there stuff in between, or is this the next step?
No, there were things in between. I always had the radio bug. I really kind of fancy myself more of an entertainer than I do a writer and headline manufacturer. So after I was let go in 2006, but even actually 3 years before that as a hobby, I joined ACB Radio Interactive, which was hosted by the American Council of the Blind. And they had people broadcasting from all over the world, the blind guys doing it, and so I joined them. I was working the all-night shift, writing news the other nights of the week, and I got Saturday night, midnight to 2 as my shift. And I was grateful for it, doggone it, and I enjoyed it, and I was playing oldies, and we actually had a 6-hour block of oldies hosts, just as it turned out, which I turned into a 6-hour block by joining, and I did that for, well, a very brief time until the boss at the office changed my day off. And and that kept me off the air because I wasn't doing Saturday night anymore.
Right.
So I moved to a Sunday afternoon show, which, by the way, I'm still doing. I did that in 2004. It's 2022 now, almost 2023. It might be by the time this goes to press. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I've been doing the Sunday afternoons for 19 years, almost.
Wow.
It will be in February.
Groovy.
And so, I mean, the hours have varied a little bit, but give or take an hour or two, that's where I've been on Sunday afternoons. And in addition, in 2008, I decided I would kind of like to join Top Shelf Oldies. And I had heard about them for years. I started listening, I think, in 2004, and heard the folks there. Hi-Fi Tim is still there as he was in 2004, in fact, and pretty much is the captain of the ship. And Dave the Rave, who you're familiar with.
Yeah, we had him on the show. Yep. We've had him on a couple of years ago, actually, and he's still out there because once you're up on our site, You're there forever.
Yes, indeed. So I listened to Dave on Saturday nights while I worked, and he was actually my first introduction to Top Shelf Oldies. So I decided I wanted to join. A set of circumstances took me and my wife off ACB Radio. We decided to leave in 2008, and I started my own station called Ride Radio, which is at therideradio.net, closest I could get to the name of the station. And so that's where I started. It actually took quite a while. I had a friend at Top Shelf named Glenn Sauter, who unfortunately is deceased now. And he was trying to get me in to share the Thursday night time slot. And eventually after I started my own station, I also ended up on Top Shelf Oldies as well.
Gotcha. So, because I just heard about Ride Radio just a while back, so it's been out there for a while, I just didn't know about it? Is that what you're saying?
Well, we... Internet radio is a big thing with relatively small audiences, and it's really kind of hard to get the word out. But we've been on since late 2008.
Wow.
September of 2008. We're just ready for our. We just passed our anniversary. Really, I'm in the wrong month, I guess, mentally.
Wow. So you say a blind guy. Now tell me about that. How do you operate and get around a studio if you're visually impaired?
Well, it's easier than most program directors think, which is, by the way, probably one of the reasons that mostly the only person who's heard of me is me. But it really is relatively easy to do. It's oddly enough, the obstacles of the 1960s and 70s were replaced by different obstacles later on. The obstacles in the 60s and 70s were transmitter meter readings.
Oh, yes.
How do you do those? Well, there was equipment. You could pay a few $100s for a device that would actually read percentages of meters, which you would translate into actual numbers. You know, we didn't have a lot of calculators in those days either, so you had to be good. But, you know, eventually all that became pretty much automatic at radio stations.
Right.
But then it became computer systems with inaccessible programs, or then it became stations that really had let most of its staff go, and therefore there weren't any jobs.
Exactly.
Or if that wasn't enough, it was the consolidation of the radio industry to where, for example, if you decided that you wanted to live in Phoenix, you know, years ago there might be 20 or 30 employers, and now there are 3 or 4. So if one guy doesn't like it, that means 10 guys don't like it.
Right. So
there are fewer jobs out there. So I mean, if I were tackling it today, well, I wouldn't even recommend radio to a sighted person. Honestly, there are those who will make their way in it in the future, but there really aren't that many radio jobs to speak of. I mean, there are some, but
right.
you have to kind of claw your way up, and in a way, there's no place to claw yourself up from because small market radio doesn't really exist anymore.
No, the old days you would go to I went to college in Vancouver, BC, British Columbia Institute of Technology, and it was always, well, you go to the interior and you start at the all-night show and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can get a gig in Kamloops.
Yeah, if you were on air, you did that. If otherwise, you could find a gig somewhere. And that was it. The all-night show. There's no all-night shows anymore. Nowhere to start. And nowhere to go after you start.
There aren't even afternoon shows anymore.
Oh, right. A lot of places. There's a few, unless you're a talk show, but even that all-night show there, they just run reruns. So it's a crazy business. So the Hometown Countdown I'm really interested in, as we're talking with Radio Rick Lewis of Ride Radio. The Hometown Countdown, where do you get all these tunes? How do you find them all?
Well, fortunately, I have a pretty large collection.
I thought so, but some of those are pretty obscure tunes.
And there are collectors. I mean, there are other collectors who have obscure tunes, fortunately, and so I don't have to be the only one who has them. I sometimes put out pleas for help. You know, to this or that person who I think might have, you know, something from a given area. You know, do you have this record by the Plebeians that came out on the Grommet record label in 1963? And somebody will.
Dave the Rave probably has it.
Yeah, he probably does.
And the surveys themselves, how do you find those from, like, you know, San Diego, 1961? Or is that easy enough?
Well, also they come from collectors.
Ah, yes.
You know, there are online websites that do have surveys, and I'm grateful that they exist, and I've been collecting them. Some have been posted in internet news groups years ago, some via email lists, and just all sorts of places wherever one can find them. Let's put it that way.
And what kind of equipment do you work with?
Well, that's a place where you can really luck out if you want to do internet broadcasting. You don't really have to have a multi-$1,000 studio. I have a mixer that just got replaced, in fact, for a little over $200. I know that isn't a large figure. It would be more impressive if I could add a couple of more zeros to it. But that and a computer and software,
yep.
And me.
And you. Yep. So do you load everything up beforehand? I mean, how do you you're seamless when you say, okay, here's another one from 1964. It was tied for number 3 in Seattle at KOL. Do you have all that stuff lined up before you do the show, or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. I spend several hours putting together the playlist every week that will come into the countdown show, except for the extras. I kind of wing it on the extras, the ones that are not on the particular survey that I'm doing, because I'll kind of decide on the spot what I want to put in there, what I think fits, and what I think works both from a regional standpoint and a national standpoint.
Now, do you have to pay performing rights fees for these things?
Oh, yes, I pay, and then after I do that, I pay, and it costs a lot of money to pay for licensing, and frankly, considering that I'm playing music from people who are, to a great extent, no longer with us,
right,
I'm not sure where that money really goes.
Exactly.
But I know where it goes out of. But really, I'm not sure what purpose it serves, but I suppose someone benefits somewhere down the line.
And how about, how do you support Ride Radio?
Fortunately, I've just been able to do it.
Okay.
When, I don't ask for donations or anything like that, but I never turn down an offer.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Right. So, do you have a listener count? Do you like ratings? Is there anything like that available for internet radio?
Well, not like no one actually compares one station against another, but we can find out how many people are listening at a given moment, and then the number is, by radio standards, where you think of a town and you think of having, say, 10 radio choices in that town, and knowing that you might have, 50,000 people in town, and if a tenth of them are listening to the radio, you might have 900 or 1,000 people listening. Well, the numbers are not like that. The numbers are relatively low when you calculate it that way. But on the other hand, you have what you have, and the good news is that in general, unless they find you by accident, people who are listening have come specifically to listen to you, or at least something like what you're offering, one would hope. And so if you're pleasing them, you hope they'll come back.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference between that and regular earthbound radio, you might say, because really, when people in a given town turn on a radio station, they're just looking for something to listen to. And with internet radio, they may be looking directly for what you have to offer.
Yes, a specific niche, as it were, like the hometown countdown. I love it, and what is the other state? Oh, Top Shelf Oldies. Sorry, I went blank there. So, and
the countdown has a history as well. On ACB Radio, Michael G. was doing a countdown. He was doing a national countdown, and he seemed to be losing interest in doing it. He changed stations, and I had done some fill-ins. It had always been my desire to do a countdown show, but of course he already had one on the station I was on.
Right.
So I had filled in for him a few times using the hometown countdown concept, and then when he changed stations and didn't add his countdown show to what he was doing there, then I picked it up, and we're friends. It's not like it's not like I stole this thing from him. He did not pick it up at the new station, and I did pick up a countdown and started doing it in 2008.
Gotcha. And a couple more questions. First of all, I'm looking at the schedule, as we say up here, or schedule for Ride Radio. So Sundays, you've got a show from London, England. How does that work?
Well, kind of the same way mine works. You broadcast to a server.
Yeah.
He broadcasts from London to a server in Dallas, and it's retransmitted from us here in Washington, oddly enough, to another server in Dallas. and so that's basically how it works. And he comes on before I do on Sunday afternoons, and the Ride has a relatively small staff. We have Lynn and Joe Payton out of London, and we have Jim Pemberton from the really far off, unusual place called Illinois.
Illinois. Oh no. And that's give me back my 70s with Jim Pemberton. And you still have Country with Deb?
Yes, Deb is my wife, and Deb does the country show right after I do the oldie show on Sunday, which is a more general oldie show than what I do on Top Shelf on Friday nights. That also is simulcast on the Ride as well, but it's a little more geared toward more obscure oldies than, say, the Sunday afternoon show is. But I like to mix things up. I like to play things. I don't like to play the same stuff over and over again. Let's put it that way. I like to play a wide variety.
Yep.
And unlike some people, I'm not the type of collector who has everything known to man, whether they should have it, whether it should exist or not. But I do try to sprinkle in quite a variety, so I'm playing everything from, mostly 50s and 60s, but everything from, early 50s R&B to harmony groups and all sorts of things in between.
And Radio Rick, where and how can we listen to you and Ride Radio?
Well, the easy way is the website, which is therideradio.net, and that will also link to the schedule. It's a relatively simple website, not a lot of doodads and gimmicks, just basically a site that contains the information about the station, the songs that are being played, the schedule, that sort of thing. And so I'm there. I'm on the air. Most of my broadcasting is centered on weekends, Friday evening, Saturday morning with Deb, Saturday evening with the Countdown Live, and Sunday afternoon I do briefer stints on Tuesday and Wednesday, and the Countdown replays on Wednesday as well, which is when it airs on Top Shelf Oldies. I'm also at TopShelfOldies.org, and that is my Friday night program, the same one that's on the Ride. It actually started on Top Shelf, the Friday night show, and the Wednesday Countdown is on Top Shelf too.
And that's TopShelfOldies.org and also TheRideRadio.net. Now, I get it through my Google Home Assistant. So are you on Alexa and Google and those things? Obviously, how do you get your shows on there?
Well, the best way on ALEXA, I don't want to trip anyone's device here, the best way there is to have it use the skill. And what you do is you say to it, enable Ride Radio skill, and assuming it understands you correctly, and it doesn't always, it will enable that skill, and from there, I suggest people say not play, but open Ride Radio. It's more likely to work, I think, properly if you say open, after you have enabled that skill. And most of the time, it will play us. It might play, accidentally, it might play Riot Radio and give you heavy metal or something else, but most of the time it'll give you us. And the skill doesn't cost anything. It's just something you enable on the device.
Gotcha. Radio Rick Lewis from Clarkston, Washington. So hello to you and Deb. And this show, of course, is going to be coming up, like you said, later on. I'll let you know, and then we can go from there. And again, thank you very much for your time today.
And thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with you and with your loyal listeners.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.